following is a teaching message from Shore Community Church. For more information on Shore or our teaching resources, visit www.shore.org.nz.
So we are in this series called True Virtue, and we're looking at the 7 deadly sins. And so far, what have we done? Sloth, envy, vainglory. And so last week we looked at sloth, and maybe you're starting to work on some habits. You know, we talked about the importance of habits, healthy spiritual habits that help us grow as disciples of Jesus. And maybe you are just starting to implement some of those habits in your life, maybe habits like Bible study, prayer, community, giving, serving, these kinds of things. And if you are, and if it's early days, you're probably just in the hardest phase of that right now, so stick with it. Stay with it. Keep the consistency. Stick with it even when you don't feel like doing it. Get those habits going. Get them embedded in your life, and you'll find over the next few weeks they'll start to become more natural. They'll start to feel more natural, and then they'll become part of who you are, and that's where the real character shaping happens. So stay with those habits in combating sloth in your life. So this morning we arrive at this topic of lust, and let me just say again, we emailed out about this, but I've rated the message M this morning. Maybe we should rate all our messages, I'm not sure, but this one is M, and so mature audiences. So parents, if you do have kids in here, just use your discretion, totally up to you if you want to have kids here, but just want to do a disclaimer up front about that. We are talking about sexuality and sex and so on this morning with this topic, and so just fair warning, parents of kids. So while you think about that and we start gearing up for this topic, we've got a video clip to play. This is it's not a cartoon this morning, I'm sorry, not a kid's movie. This is the movie called Anna Karenina, which is based on the Russian novel by Tolstoy, and it just sets the scene. So listen to this dialogue and then we'll get into it. All right, so interesting little dialogue there just about the difference between love and impure love, which is basically what lust is. That idea that love makes us more human, fulfills our humanness, but lust diminishes our humanity, makes us less human, makes us more like animals, makes us more like cattle. We'll come back to that clip in a little while, but I want to dive into the Bible first this morning. And so if you've got a Bible, open up to Proverbs chapter 7. That's where we're going to be this morning. What we've tried to do in this series each week is ground the topic in a person or a group of people in the Bible that exhibit traits of this particular sin. And so we're going to do that again this morning, kind of, except that the person we're looking at this morning, the woman we're looking at this morning, is not a real person. She's a metaphor, because the text in Proverbs 7 is a piece of poetry, and it's fiction. And so this person we're going to be talking about, is a metaphorical person. She's a symbol. She represents something, not a literal person, okay? Hopefully this will become clear as we read it. So let's dive in here at verse 6, Proverbs 7. At the window of my house, I looked down through the lattice. I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men, a youth who had no sense. He was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house, at twilight, as the day was fading, as the dark of night set in. Then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute and with crafty intent. She is unruly and defiant, her feet never stay at home. Now in the street, now in the squares, at every corner she lurks. She took hold of him and kissed him, and with a brazen face she said, "Today I fulfilled my vows, and I have food from my fellowship offering at home. So I came out to meet you. I have looked for you and have found you. I have covered my bed with coloured linens from Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let's drink deeply of love till morning. Let's enjoy ourselves with love. My husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took his purse filled with money and will not be home till full moon." With pervasive words, she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once he followed her like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, till an arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways, or stray into her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. So, pretty sobering text there, and we have this very poetic kind of story about this young guy, goes out for a walk at night, and he comes across this woman She's dressed provocatively, she's dressed seductively, she's dressed like a prostitute, and she's got one thing on her mind. She is out to seduce this guy. She wants to lure him into her bedroom for a secret rendezvous. And he's not the first victim that she's had. You can tell the text talks about, she's out, she's defiant, she lurks on every street corner, she lurks at the city square. Many are her victims. She's done this before. She's seduced countless guys. So this guy is not the first by any stretch. But she sees this guy, and she goes up to him, and she just brazenly kisses him, and then she starts to tell him all of these things to try and woo him and lure him and seduce him. She talks about how her husband's not at home at the moment. He's away on this long, long trip. It doesn't really matter whether that's true or not. The point is, for him, that adds to the risk of the situation. And lust has a lot to do with risk. It's part of the adrenaline rush. It's part of the thrill, is that there's an element of risk here. So for him, he's loving that. Her husband's away. There's a bit of adventure here. There's a bit of risk here. She talks about all the spices that she's got. You notice how she appeals to all of his senses? It's a multi-sensory. I mean, she's got the sight, the sight of her. She's appealing to his sense of smell with all of these spices, there's cinnamon and so on. I don't know why cinnamon. Let's not even go there. But anyway, all these spices, and his mind is racing. His sense of hearing these words, these seductive words about the bed sheets that she's imported from Egypt and so on. And with all of these smooth words, she's talking and seducing and luring him in. And he takes the bait. He follows her into her home like an ox to the slaughter, even though that last verse talks about her house being a highway to the grave, leading to death. But he just follows. He's not thinking about what a dumb decision this is. He's not thinking about what an insane thing this is to do. He's not thinking rationally. Lust is not a rational thing. He's just completely intoxicated with this woman. He's in the moment. He's just completely in the moment, and he's overwhelmed by this desire and this seductive experience, and he follows her off into her house, and off they go. He takes the bait. So it's a very poetic story, it's a very vivid story, but really this woman in Proverbs 7, she represents the vice of lust. It is one of the most vivid pictures we get in the Bible of what lust actually looks like. This woman is lust personified. And it's not just this one scenario. Don't think this is only about that one literal scenario of illicit sex. This is all of the ways, she represents all of the ways in which lust affects us and seduces us and claws away at us and leads us down these paths which in our more rational moments we know are completely stupid, and yet in the moment we follow, we are seduced, we are led astray down these ways that are damaging and destructive and lead to a kind of death. Maybe not physical death, but certainly emotional, mental, relational death. That's where it all leads. And it's amazing to me. I mean, this passage was written thousands of years ago, but I think it just speaks with such power into our world today, into our lives, into our culture today. This woman of lust, she symbolizes so much of our hyper-sexualized culture that we live in. The passage talks about how she lurks on every street corner. And you think about it today, this woman of lust, she still lurks on every street corner. She's on the billboards that we drive past every day that contain sexual images. She represents the ads that pop up on our phones, devices, TV, and so on, that use sex to sell pretty much everything. She's on the content of TV programs, movies, and the lyrics of songs that we listen to, the content of video games that are played. She crops up everywhere. We see her in the exploits of a couple of All Blacks recently that have gotten themselves into trouble for some dodgy behaviour. And it reminds you of just how prevalent lust is, what a problem it is, how destructive it can be. She represents internet pornography, obviously. She represents the sexualization of young girls, one of the more disturbing facets of lust, and the way you have now fashion, clothing marketed to 7, 8, 9-year-olds. That's provocative and revealing and has sexual slogans on it, provocative slogans on it. And we're teaching girls earlier and earlier to see themselves as sex objects. And obviously this woman represents, you come over to the other side of the equation, and she represents the millions of women and girls that are pushed into the porn industry and sex trafficked. so that they can satisfy the appetites of people that consume the stuff. It is such a destructive force in lives and families and communities and cultures as a whole. Lust just gets its claws into our world. Let me read you a quote from John Mayer. He's a well-known musician and singer. And this is, ironically enough, this is an interview that he gave with Playboy magazine. I didn't get it from there, just so you know. I got it from another source. But this is an actual interview that he did with Playboy magazine. Here's what he says. You wake up in the morning, open a thumbnail page, and it leads to a Pandora's box of visuals. There have probably been days when I saw 300 naked women before I got out of bed. Internet pornography has absolutely changed my generation's expectations. How does that not affect the psychology of having a relationship with somebody? It's got to. This is my problem now. Rather than meet somebody new, I would rather go home and replay the amazing experiences I've already had. What that explains is that I'm more comfortable in my imagination than I am in actual human discovery. And I don't think that John Mayer, he doesn't come across as a particularly creepy person. He's not known as a particularly seedy guy. He's articulating what so many people struggle and battle with in his generation and subsequent generations since the rise of the internet. Because the internet has revolutionized access to pornography. I mean, it used to be that you had to go to the dairy and you had to actually ask for the magazine and then go through the shame of having it in the brown paper bag and taking it home. But now it's on your phone. It's anytime, anywhere, in the privacy of your own bedroom or wherever you are. It's so available. It's so accessible. And so the rise of the internet has led to an absolute explosion in the pornography industry, internet pornography. And I read this week that about 90% of sexually explicit stuff online is consumed free. So there is pay-per-view stuff, but most of it's being consumed free. And that's how accessible it is. That's how available it is now. That's how rampant it is. But lust, of course, is not just pornography. We don't want to just say lust equals porn and leave it at that. That's obviously one big expression of the topic, but lust is much broader and deeper than that. So let's step back and try and get a definition of what lust is. Here's how I would define lust. Lust is sexual desire turned in on itself. Sexual desire turned in on itself. So underneath that definition is the assumption that sexual desire in and of itself is a good thing. Okay, that's what we need to get out there up front. God is pro-sex. Okay, God created us as sexual beings. He created us male and female. Our gender, our sexuality is integral to what it means to be human. It's part of our humanity. Our sexual desire is a good thing. It's a God-given thing. But like every other desire we have, it can be warped and twisted and turned in for selfish purposes. And you see this as a theme in the series. You're picking this up with vainglory, with envy, with sloth. All of it, they come from desires that are in themselves good. We have these human desires, but these desires become corrupted because of our sinful nature. And then they become self-directed. So our sexual desires and impulses are designed to be fulfilled, to be primarily expressed in the context of a committed marriage relationship. But we take these desires and we warp them and we twist them and we pervert them and we use them for self-gratification. When sexual desire becomes used for self-satisfaction, self-gratification, self-obsession, self-fulfillment, it's lust in whatever form. So obviously we're talking about more than just pornography here. Lust affects our whole beings. It's a holistic thing. It affects all of our lives, all of our personhood. Lust affects our minds. It's perfectly possible for a blind person to lust. Perfectly possible, because you harbor mental fantasies. And you harbor these images, often more powerful images in our minds than what actually exists on screen or on paper. And especially, if you've looked at images in the past, explicit images in the past, especially moving images, those images stay with you for decades. And they're in your mind and you can recall them at a second's notice. And we harbor these fantasies, and we think it's okay because it's just in our minds. And we think it's okay because I'm not acting out on them. We think it's okay because it's not harming another person, but that is just as much an expression of lust happening in our minds. We lust in our minds. We lust with our hearts. When we're drawn with desire towards another person who's not our spouse. And this affects men just as much as women. You know, traditionally lust is thought of as just a guy thing, and maybe some of you women came to church this morning think this wasn't going to be relevant for you. Lust is an equal opportunity sin. It affects all of us. And that impulse in your heart to be drawn to another person, maybe someone that's giving you a bit of attention, maybe someone at work, maybe another parent at your kid's school, someone's taking an interest in you. Someone's got a bit of charm, someone's attractive, and maybe it's not happening so much in your own marriage if you're married. Maybe that's a bit average at the moment. Maybe that fire's not particularly hot. So someone over here is bringing some heat, and your heart just starts to be lured, and you never thought you would be the kind of person that would be lured towards infidelity. But you feel that pull in your heart. You feel that bond with this other person. It's the beginnings of lust. It's one of the ways in which lust gets a hold of our heart, ultimately becomes expressed in illicit relationships. Lust affects our eyes, obviously, and the things that we watch and the things that we see, but it's not just pornography. It's not just things that are in that category. It's all sorts of things. It's watching Game of Thrones. I just cannot think of a reason for Christians to watch Game of Thrones. I can't. And you can say, oh, it doesn't affect me. I'm not, I just let that stuff wash over. I tell you what, it affects you in ways you've got no idea. I haven't seen it, but I understand it's pretty explicit. And when you've got a program with explicit sex scenes and rape scenes, there is no good reason for Christians to watch that. There is no good reason to fill our minds and our eyes and our hearts with that stuff. We just don't need to be doing it. And it might not even be that it might be just scrolling through Facebook. And you come across an image that's a bit provocative, and rather than scrolling on, you just linger. Linger a little bit too long. We lust with our bodies in all kinds of ways, whether alone, you know what I'm talking about, or with other people in ways that are not glorifying to God. Turn our sexual desire inwards towards self-gratification. Lust affects all of us, our whole beings. And because it affects our whole being, it damages our whole being. It's like a toxin. It's like a poison. It comes into our life and it just corrupts us. Corrupts our hearts, our lives, and then it spills over and starts affecting relationships. I mean, you think about that John Mayer quote again, and the way he talks about why would I bother going and having normal human relationships when I can just look at these images in my bedroom? Why bother? Why bother with the hassle of dating someone, actually dealing with a person? That's messy, that's hard, that's difficult. I can just escape into this fantasy world in the privacy of my own home. And when we're entrenched in habits like pornography, it makes it more and more difficult for us to actually engage in proper human relationships, either in marriage or just in general, because we reduce people in our mind to sexual objects and we see them one-dimensionally as just a commodity. Sexual impurity takes away our ability to relate to other people as human beings made in the image of God. Lust damages marriages massively. It puts huge strain on marriages and fractures them and fractures homes. And I tell you what, it damages future marriages too. The marriages that haven't even become marriages yet. If you're single and you're engaging in something like pornography or a sexual relationship and you're not married yet, this is affecting, if you go on to get married, this is affecting your marriage relationship down the track in ways you're not even aware of yet. It's going to affect your marriage. It affects present marriages and future marriages. Lust busts up homes. It damages careers. You only need to look at the All Blacks to see that, the way they put their careers in jeopardy by doing this sort of stuff. It damages ministries. It fractures churches. It is a destructive vice. It damages our relationship with God. And I think that the most powerful way that lust damages us is it breaks down our relationship with ourselves. Because so often people that are stuck in these kinds of behaviors, especially when the behavior has become addictive and it's become compulsive, they absolutely hate themselves. And they are so filled with guilt and with shame and with condemnation because they want to stop. They want to stop doing this thing. They want to stop meeting this person. They want to stop hooking up. They want to stop looking at those sites. But it's like the harder they try, the harder it gets. The more willpower they seem to exert, the more they seem to fail and crash and burn. And every time they just loathe themselves more. They hate themselves more. They feel completely despairing of ever being able to break free of this thing. They feel a billion miles away from God, if they're a Christian, and they just utterly despise themselves. They feel like the Apostle Paul, who said, the very thing I don't want to do, that's what I do. Wretched man that I am. And so many people, maybe some of you here this morning, are just stuck in a place, bound up in shame, bound up in guilt, feeling totally condemned, feeling worthless and unlovable because you're in a pattern of impurity and lust in some area of your life. It's entangled you and enslaved you, and you can't see a way out of it, and you hate yourself for it. It's an awful, awful place to be. And sometimes, honestly, churches don't help. Because sometimes we don't know how to talk about this stuff. It's awkward, it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable, and so we just don't talk about it. That makes it worse. Or we just pile up more judgment and condemnation. And we say, you just got to do better. You got to try harder. You got to read your Bible. You got to pray. Come on. Sort yourself out. And people try and they fail and they feel worse than they did to begin with. And we just pile layer upon layer of judgment and guilt and condemnation upon people. And I want to tell you, if this is where you are, if this is your struggle this morning, what you need to hear is not a word of judgment. You need to hear a word of grace. You need to hear a word of grace that God loves you and God is endlessly forgiving towards you. And no matter how many times you have fallen, God is always so ready to take you back and restore you and cleanse you. That's what you need to hear this morning. You need to hear a word of hope, a word of freedom. Let me read you again some verses from that passage Sam read out from Psalm 51. And this psalm was written by King David after he had spectacularly blown it in this whole area, committed adultery with another man's wife, then organized to have him murdered, then concealed up a pregnancy outside of marriage. I mean, he just had this massive fall from grace in this occasion. But here's what he says as he comes to God. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions, wash away all my iniquity, cleanse me from my sin. That is what God will do for you. As you come to him and confess these sins and bring them before him, he will cleanse you. No matter how dirty you feel, no matter how filthy you feel, God will cleanse you and wash you by his grace. Because I know after the 500th time, you really start to wonder if God's grace is going to stretch that far, don't you? After the 5,000th time of doing the same thing, whatever it may be, you start to wonder, is God's grace really going to stretch this far? I'll tell you what, when Jesus went to the cross, he knew exactly what he was taking on. He didn't die for this much, but leave the rest out. He died for it all. On the cross, Jesus took upon himself your pornography addiction. He took upon himself all the illicit relationships you've had, all the things that you've done. He took upon himself that one big thing you've done in your past that you are so ashamed of. He took upon himself all those thoughts and inclinations and desires that are in your heart that you wouldn't admit to a single person because they are so dark and ugly, but they're there. Jesus took that upon himself on the cross. He bore it in his body and he died for it so that you could be free from it, so that you could be cleansed, so you could be forgiven. And I want you to hear that this morning. God's grace is available to you. It is so free, it is so full, and it will cover all of your sin. He will wash you. Doesn't matter your sin is scarlet, but he will wash you whiter than snow. And the first step in dealing with lust is coming before God and just receiving his forgiveness and allowing him to cleanse you by his grace. He will do that, and he will do it every time. You cannot out-sin God. And then from that place of grace, only from that place, can we start to pursue freedom from lust in our lives. We've got to do it anchored in grace. It can't just be self-effort. It can't just be willpower. We've got to acknowledge, I can't do this by myself. I'm powerless by myself, but by the transforming grace of God, I can break free. By the power of God's grace, I can move forward. So anchor yourself deeply in the love of the Father for you, in your acceptance and forgiveness in God. And then from that place, we can start to take some steps towards freedom. And as you come back to Proverbs 7, there's some great practical advice in here as to how we can actually pursue freedom in our lives from the power of lust. Come back to this chapter again. Let's look at it one more time in this passage at the end. Verse 24 says, "Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray into her paths." I love the way the Message translation puts that verse. It says, do not fool around with a woman like that. Don't even stroll through her neighborhood. It's good, eh? Don't even stroll through the neighborhood. Because think about, we've focused a lot on the woman in this passage, but think about the guy for a minute. You've got to ask some questions about this guy, don't you? He's not exactly the innocent party, is he? What's he doing out walking at twilight? What's he doing just having a bit of a stroll? And the text earlier talks about how he walked in the direction of her house. Could have gone anywhere, could have walked anywhere, but as he chose between that way and this way, he thought, I'm going to walk in the direction. He knew what he was doing. You see what he's doing? He's got plausible deniability because he's just out for a walk. But in his heart of hearts, he knows what's going on. He knows where he's heading. He knows which house he's aiming for. You know how this works. You're just sort of online because you need to browse for something, you need to buy something, you need to check out a cute little YouTube video with puppy dogs or something like that. And then you're in the neighborhood. And it's not long before you're on some sites that you shouldn't be on. Or you're just hanging out in the office in a particular place where you know a particular other person might also be hanging out. And you've got plausible deniability because you're just having lunch. But in your heart of hearts, you know why you're there. We just stroll through the neighborhood, wondering, playing with fire, dancing with danger, hoping it might lead to the house. So what you've got to ask yourself, to extend this metaphor, is what is your house? What's the house? The house is the point of greatest temptation. So in this whole area of lust, what for you is the house? What is the point of greatest temptation? Is it another person, particular individual in your life right now that you're kind of drawn to in an illicit relationship? Is it multiple people? Is it sex addiction? Is it multiple hookups? Is it internet sites? What is that house for you? What is that point of greatest temptation? And then step back and ask yourself, okay, if that's the house, what is the neighborhood? What are the paths that I'm taking to get to the house? What are the roads that I'm walking down that take me to the house? What are the prior steps I'm taking that lead me there? So it might be something like an app on your phone that you're playing around with that's leading you down a certain path. It might be jumping online. Just being on the internet itself takes you into a neighborhood, but then often leads you to the house. It might be a certain place that you go to where you think another person might be and you're kind of flirting with it there, and that's the neighborhood for you. It might be going to certain places like the gym, like the beach, and you know by going to those places you're putting yourself in the danger zone. It might be hanging out with a certain group of people who are influencing you to do stupid things. What is the neighborhood for you? And then the warning of the passage is, don't even stroll through her neighborhood. Because when you get to the doorstep of the house, it's far, far harder to resist, isn't it? You know that. When you've got that site right in front of you, when that TV program's coming on, when you're there talking to that person, it's far, far harder to step back at that stage. You've got to start by not even going into the neighborhood, not even taking a step down the path that's going to lead you to the point of temptation. Don't even stroll through the neighborhood. I'll tell you what this looks like in my life. It means not going on the internet when there's no one home. Not even going on the internet unless someone else is in the room. It means at work, in the office, I don't go on the internet unless my door is open, unless there's someone else working on the same floor as me and my monitor is facing the door. Now, you could say, that's ridiculous, that is so pedantic, but I tell you what I'm doing is I'm protecting myself, I'm protecting my marriage, I'm protecting my family. So if you call it pedantic, okay, that's what I need to do because I know my weaknesses and I know my vulnerabilities, and that's what I need to do to protect myself. That's what I need to do to not stroll into the neighborhood. So I'm not saying that's exactly what you need to do. I'm saying, what is the house for you, and what does it mean for you not to stroll into the neighborhood? There's a story of a guy who took the same train to work every day. And on the train, he often sat next to the same woman. And over time, he started to have some feelings for her. Started to feel this attraction, feel this chemistry, feel a bit of a bond. He was a married man. So he opened up to his wife about it. And he said, I'm starting to have these feelings for this woman on this train. What should I do? And she said to him just 2 words: change trains. Change trains. That's what you've got to do. Change trains. And you might say, that's really inconvenient. Man, if that's the sacrifice you need, I'll tell you what, it might be bigger than that. It might be change jobs. It might be change neighborhoods. It might be, and you could say that's over the top and it's an overreaction. But Jesus said, better to go through life missing one right hand than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And what he's saying is it's better to cut off that area of our life that's causing problems than walk down a road that is going to lead you to death. Spiritual, mental, emotional death. That's where the path of the adulterous woman leads. So friends, we've got to do what is required, not to go anywhere near the door of her house. What does the neighborhood look like for you? I'm not being legalistic. I'm just saying put the boundaries in place that will protect your heart. And one of the most helpful things you can do here is bring someone else into your journey and make yourself accountable to someone else. Because if it's just you making up these rules and I'm going to do this and then I'm going to try really hard to stick to it, you're only going to get so far. But if you can bring someone else into your journey, open up to someone else, there's huge power in it. There's huge help in it. Just one person, not a whole group, not a public announcement, just one trusted Christian person. Could you find someone that you can talk to about this, about your struggle? And you'll find that when you talk to someone, when you open up to someone about this, there is such a burden lifted. The very act of bringing this thing out of the secret place, out of the darkness. You know, this sin, it lurks in the darkness. It lurks in the private places and the dark places. And while it lurks in the shadows, it's got a huge power over our lives. But when you bring it out into the light, it robs it of its power. You bring it out into the light and you place it before another person and you open up to them and you find that the very act of talking about it with another person just diminishes the power that it has, and you realize this isn't all-consuming, this isn't hopeless, but this is something that by God's grace I can break free from. Bring it out into the light. Talk to someone about it, and you're not asking them to be a counselor. You're not asking them to fix it. You're just asking them to hold you accountable to the commitments that you've made. So describe the situation and describe the boundaries that you need to put in place, and just ask them, give them permission to ask you some hard questions from time to time, and check up how you're doing, how's it going, to pray for you, to encourage you, just to be part of your journey. It is immensely powerful in breaking free of this thing, to bring someone else into the story, bring someone else into your journey. Do you remember last year Nick Willis opened up about his struggle with pornography? Nick Willis, the athlete, the middle distance runner. And he opened up on social media and then in the news media about his struggle and talked about how since a teenager he'd been struggling with a porn addiction and had gone through these cycles of shame and justification for years and years and years, battled away. And then finally he opened up about it to his wife. And together they put some things in place. And at the time that he opened up about it, he was free from pornography, I think, for about 2 years. And here's what he says: getting this topic out of my secret life and into the open and talking has been the biggest impact in breaking the cycle. Talking to someone else. I know it might feel awkward and uncomfortable, but if you can just summon the strength by God's grace to talk to someone else, you will find there is power in it and there is freedom in it, and it starts you on the journey. So talk to someone else. I know today this is a really tricky topic. It's an intense kind of topic, and I'm really conscious that one sermon is just a drop in the bucket. For some of you, this is a lifetime struggle. It is full on, and it is hard, and it is all-consuming. So what we want to do as a church is continue to walk with one another as we battle this stuff. There's an email that's going to come out this afternoon, if you're on the church database, with a bunch of next steps, people that you can talk to, and some next steps that you can take if you struggle in various ways with this sin. Seeing a counselor is a really good step, especially if it's become an entrenched habit, if it's become addictive, if it's become compulsive. It's fantastic to sit down with a counselor, a Christian counselor, and just help them, enable them to unpack things with you, give you some tools, give you some strategies for dealing with this in your life. So on the email, there's a link to the Equip Counselling Centre, a centre we work closely with. They've got male and female counsellors that you can make an appointment with. Take a step. Talk to somebody. There's a link there to Triple X Church, which is a great resource for dealing with online pornography. There's a link to 2 fantastic books, Every Man's Battle and Every Woman's Battle, which speak into areas of sexual temptation. There's also Every Young Man's Battle and Every Young Woman's Battle. Think about these for your children as well, those of you that have got adolescent kids. There's a couple of resources there for strengthening marriages. against not only sexual temptation, but a whole lot of temptation. So have a read of that email. It might go into your junk mail because of the nature of some of the links. So it might be misconstrued by your email server. And so pull it out of spam, pull it out of junk mail, and if you get an email this afternoon from Shore Community Church, it's legit, okay? You can look at it, you can read it. The links are all okay. Have a read of that. And if someone else opens up to you, would you be full of grace towards them? Would you be completely unshockable in your response? Don't freak out, but just be full of grace. This is what we want to be as a church. I'm hoping that even bringing this out into the open this morning, I hope, is a step towards us as a church becoming a community of grace where it's okay to talk about this stuff. We don't need to keep it in the shadows. We don't need to be all awkward and embarrassed. We can have mature conversations about it. We can have adult conversations about it. We can love each other. We can support each other. We are for each other, right, in this struggle. We want to be a community of grace. So extend grace, truckloads of grace to each other as we open up in all kinds of conversations that I hope will come out of today. Let's be a community of grace in reaching out for God's grace in our own lives and just accepting that we are forgiven and loved. That's where some of you are, and that's the next step for you, is accepting that you're already accepted and loved and forgiven for this. And let's be a community of grace that takes hold of the transforming power of God's grace in our lives as we walk towards freedom and we walk towards breaking free from the way that lust gets its claws into our lives. God is powerful and gracious, and he can and will work in us and among us. Let's pray. Father God, we want to thank you that at the cross there is all the power that we need to defeat sin in our lives. And I pray this morning, God, for people that are bound up and trapped in all kinds of sins to do with sexual temptation. I pray for people right now who are feeling hopeless, who are feeling helpless, who are feeling like they just can't see a way forward, or they've tried all this before and it hasn't made a difference. God, we know how easily the evil one creeps in and becomes the accuser and just convinces us that we'll never, ever break free. I want to pray, God, this morning that you would rebuke him and that you would give Satan no power to influence our lives and to steal away the word that's been spoken this morning. We want to pray, God, that you would free us from these temptations. God, we pray your prayer that you gave us to pray. Deliver us from the evil one. Lead us not into temptation. And I pray, God, for an outpouring of your power and grace upon all those who struggle and battle in this area, whether in the smallest little ways or in huge, big ways in their lives. God, would you pour out your power upon them? Would you pour out the power of your Spirit? Would you give them courage to open up, courage to confess, courage to bring this sin out into the light, courage to have a conversation? And God, would you just fill them with the strength of your Spirit to believe that the future can be different to the past, that there can be a new hope and a new way of living and a life of purity far greater than the life of impurity that they're leaving behind. Lead us to freedom, God. Lead us to hope. Lead us to Jesus. We pray it in his name. Amen.
This has been a teaching message from Shore Community Church. For more of our teaching resources, or to donate to our teaching resource ministry, or for more information on Shore Community Church, visit www.shore.org.nz. Alternatively, you can email office@shore.org.nz or phone 09 415 0455. Thank you for listening.